Hey everybody, today we're going to do a CV axle replacement on my 2015 Subaru Forester. So what I noticed recently is when I was driving, I'd be making a left turn while accelerating and I'd get a clicking sound. And so the way that works is whatever wheel has the weight on it, when it's making the sound, that's probably the axle that's going bad. So when you're making a left turn, the car's weight is transferring to the right side, and if you're accelerating, it's pushing to the rear, so the right rear wheel was getting the weight during that left turn while accelerating, and that's why the noise was coming from there. So that's the axle in trouble. If you're accelerating while making a right turn and you're getting noise, that means it's your left rear. If you're making a right turn while either not accelerating or just coasting, then it's going to be your left front axle, and then for a left turn, it's going to be your right front. So that's how that works. And what I did was the dealership's going to charge you like $700 or $800 to put in a new OEM axle. So I opted to try and do this myself. We'll see if we can do this. I picked up a salvaged OEM CV axle off of a wrecked 2015 Subaru Forester. So unfortunately, somebody got in a wreck with their nice car, but they were able to salvage that out of it. So we're going to see if this works. It has 30,000 miles on it. My car has 108,000 miles. So we'll see if I can get some use out of this. They do sell remanufactured CV axles that apparently work pretty good, that are OEM. You can also take your chances with a aftermarket CV axle, but that's going to run the risk of getting vibrations and other issues because it's not going to be the same spec as what the engineers wanted for their OEM. So you need to get yourself a new CV axle, or you can try and rebuild it, but I don't, this was only $79. So that's a good price, so we're going to take our chances with that. You need your CV axle, and then you also need a new axle nut, because when you take this little cover off, the axle nut is going to be on there, and it's tapped into a little indentation. I'll show you on the spline here. They put a little indentation on the end of there that you basically index that axle nut into, and that's a safety feature to keep it from flying off, so you don't lose your axle while you're on the freeway. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing you can do while you still have the car on the ground is get your lug nuts loosened. So just like that. Okay, we got the car jacked up nice and high on all 4 points. You want some extra room to work under there, because you're going to be pulling that axle out of the differential, and you're might have to pry it. So let's go ahead and finish taking the wheel off here. Take off the axle nut here, and I don't know if you can see that, but most axle nuts are indexed, meaning there's a little divot in the spindle on the axle that's already in there, and the axle nut gets basically pounded into that divot, and that's a safety feature to keep it from coming loose while you're driving. So we'll go ahead and take a little chisel and kind of tap that out before we remove the axle nut. So we're going to use a breaker bar to get the axle nut off. This is a 1 1/4 inch socket we're going to use, and you need to have a helper at this point. Hold on to the brakes. You need to be pushing on the brakes while you do this. So
Let's see if we can get this off. Oh yeah, that actually came loose. I'm pretty surprised that was that easy. Well, we're in California here, so that's probably why. But yeah, got that axle nut off. So you have the axle nut off. You give your spindle a whack here, and that should knock it loose. You just want it to you want to hit it so that it'll loosen up a little bit. And this is only do this if you're don't plan on rebuilding your axle that you're taking out.
Okay, so we have the wheel off, and we're ready to start attacking this. I have the factory service manual here, but I mean, it wants me to remove pretty much everything in this assembly here, which I don't think we need to necessarily do that. Take all the brakes apart, whatnot. I think what we're gonna try first is move ball joint here and the control arm here for the camber, and see if we can rotate this out of the way. We'll also disconnect some of the brackets for these lines so that we have a little bit of play, and hopefully that'll give us enough clearance to get this axle. First thing I'm going to undo is the brake line bracket right here. So now we have a little more slack with all that, so we can move that wheel hub around. Thing we're going to remove is the ABS sensor line. So that's this line right here, and there's a couple brackets that we want to loosen up, and these are a little bit different. They're not held in with bolts. They have a little tab that you take a screwdriver and you depress the tab right in here like this, and that frees it open, and then it just comes open like that. You can loosen that up. This one is going to be a little trickier. Got to depress it from above. That should come open. Like that. Let's see if we can get that. There we go. So now there's a lot more slack for this line too. Can move the wheel hub around. So this is the next bolt we're going to remove. It's also a 17mm bolt, and you need to hold it on the other side here, and you loosen it. And it should be not as bad as the other bolts to get loose. So that should be plenty loose now. Should be able to even get that off by hand maybe. Let's see. Oh, not quite. Try it a little bit more here. Oh. Okay, got that bolt out. The next bolt that we remove is off the strut assembly here. It's another 17mm with a nut on this side, and then the actual bolt heads on the other side, so you need 2 wrenches to get this loose as well. And then that should get the whole hub free and loose without messing up your alignment. So I'm sorry that I didn't get this part on film for you guys, but how I ended up dropping this hub assembly is I loosened this bolt on the control arm here. I loosened the ball joint here, and the strut bolt right here. Those were the 3 that needed to be done. Didn't even have to do the camber bolt. Didn't even have to take that off. Well, this is the actual cam bolt up here, but I took the lower bolt off, or loosened it. But it's actually good to leave that one on, because it's keeping it from falling too far off. Because as you can see, this is why the manual, they want you to
take the brakes off, because it would be real easy to rip that line out or damage it if you're not careful when you pull that hub off. Okay, so we're under the car now, and here's where the CV axle hooks up to the differential, and you're gonna take a crowbar and just bring it in like this and pry that thing out. Whoop, and make sure not to have anything fall on your head. So I'm in California, so this all comes out real easy, but in a lot of states it's gonna be rusty. So part of my method of not having to disassemble the brakes to do this job is I got a man crate. That was a gift from my sister for Christmas, but I have this being supported here by wood, and we just want to keep the weight, the pressure off these lines here, so we don't have to disconnect do all this extra work. So we have the old CV axle out, and we have the new one ready to go in. They look pretty much identical, don't they? So I didn't have torn boots or anything. It just failed prematurely. I mean, I have 108,000 miles on it, so I guess that's not too premature. But yeah, kind of strange that that it failed. So this is the salvaged one that I got, and it has the snap ring in it. I mean, everything's ready to go. You just got to put some gear oil on the end of it right there. That's the part that goes into the differential, and should be same way it came out. You put it back in. Okay, so we got the new CV or the salvage CV axle back in there. Yeah, same way we pulled it out. What we'll do is we'll put the new axle nut on there, just kind of loosely by hand, while we reconnect all the stuff up here, just so we kind of keep that axle secured. Okay, so we have the axle back in, and we tightened all our bolts back up. We tightened this bolt up, put the cotter pin back in, tightened this one up, torqued it down pretty good, got our ball joint back in, tighten that one down, and got that one tightened up. And we also tightened our brake line bracket bolt, put that back in. Same with the clips. You can't really see that, but you remember from earlier in the video, we put the clips back in for the ABS sensor. So the last thing to do was the axle nut, so we just hand tightened that on there earlier. But what you do is you have your helper reapply the brakes again, just like when you remove the old axle nut. You have them apply the brakes again, and then you torque that down. I think for this Subaru it was about 140 foot-pounds, so you basically just want to get that on there really tight. And then for safety, you also chisel. Let me get that focused. You go ahead and chisel the index that back into the little slot on the spindle there. So we'll go ahead and do that. Just get that chisel lined up and pound away on it until that's dimpled in there. Not gonna go anywhere. That looks good. See if we can get you a close-up shot of that. So that's dimpled in there. That's not gonna walk itself out. So that's it. You got that all completed, and only thing left to do is put the wheel back on. So when you're putting your wheel back on, you always want to start your lug nuts by hand, and that's so you don't mistakenly cross thread them. So if you get your tires rotated at a shop, a lot of times they just zap them on there with the impact wrench, and that's how they get cross threaded. And if you go to take them off later, they're hopelessly stuck, and you end up snapping off the wheel studs. And replacing the wheel studs, I mean, that's it's a fairly straightforward process, but it's a pain in the butt, and you don't want to have to do that. So just take a little extra time and start all your threads by hand, get them down there pretty good. Save yourself a little misery, and it's better for safety too, to have a nice secure wheel.
So you want to just get your lug nuts snugly, but you don't crank them down until you bring your wheel down to the ground. So go ahead and do that. Then you can go ahead and crank them the rest of the way. And you do one nut, and then you go to the opposite side. Get them tight, like star pattern, basically. So this should be on there really good. And now you just repaired your CV axle. Thanks for watching the video.